This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. Our show is brought to you by Mac's List and our book, Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. To learn more about the book and the updated edition that we're publishing in February, visit maxlist.org/ebook. One of the most common questions we're asked at Mac's List is this: how do I get a nonprofit job? It's a big question, and we hear it from all kinds of people. Recent college graduates, corporate employees who want to switch careers, or government workers who want to continue to serve the public. Like the question, the nonprofit sector is big. Almost 11 million Americans work for nonprofits in all kinds of jobs, from running soup kitchens to serving Girl Scouts. We don't have all the answers for you today, but we can help you get started. Joining me as our expert guest this week is Allison Jones. She's the Marketing and Publications Director at N10. That stands for Nonprofit Technology Enterprise Network. We also have the Mac's List team, Ben Forstag, our Managing Director, and Cecilia Bianco, our Community Manager, and they have resources and answers to questions about the nonprofit sector. Let's get started and begin by checking in with the Mac's List team. Cecilia, Ben, how are you two this week?
I'm doing awesome.
Doing really good, Mac.
Good. Well, let's talk about nonprofit jobs. Now, tell me, have either one of you worked in the nonprofit sector?
I spent 15 years in the nonprofit sector in Pennsylvania, in Spain, in D.C., and most recently here in Portland.
Okay. And do you have one big lesson from that experience you want to share with our listeners about your time in the nonprofit world?
I think the big thing that I share with people is that a lot of times there's a stereotype that nonprofit careers, you can't do well in them, that you have to be the starving artist of sorts. But I think nonprofits are becoming increasingly professionalized, and you can have a career in which you do well for yourself and do good for the public as well. It's a really rewarding career.
Yeah. How about you, Cecilia?
I haven't worked for a nonprofit previously, but through my work at Mac's List, I've met a lot of people who are in that sector, so I'm pretty familiar with that. And I would agree with Ben that that's a big misconception that's starting to change.
Yeah, I've worked for one nonprofit directly, and like you, Cecilia, worked with a lot of different nonprofits as a vendor and partner. And I have seen a professionalization of the sector throughout my career, and it's a good sign to see. So let's turn to Ben, who every week is out there exploring the internet, looking for resources you can use, whether it's a blog, a podcast, or other tool. Ben, what do you have for us this week?
So because we're talking about nonprofits this week, I wanted to spend a little time talking about the website Charity Navigator and how it can be a resource for people who are looking for jobs in the nonprofit sector. So Charity Navigator, as I'm sure you know, is mostly known for its scoring system for charities, foundations, and other registered nonprofits. Each year, they review the public filings for thousands of local, regional, and national nonprofits, and they award stars based on each organization's financial viability, transparency, program spending, and other factors. These stars have become quite a big thing in the nonprofit community, as a star rating can have a major impact on potential donors. I know in my own experience, when an organization I was in went from 3 stars to 2 stars, it raised a lot of questions from our donors about what's going on.
And it's a tool that Charity Navigator often comes up in the media when it releases information about the percentage of a budget a nonprofit spends on fundraising. And there are organizations out there that spend far too much on development and not enough on services. And that's one of the facts that Charity Navigator tracks.
And I should say Charity Navigator is not without its challenges, and there's some serious questions out there in the media and in the nonprofit community about how exactly they give these ratings out. But for today's purposes, this is the big site that people go to for evaluating nonprofits. So we're going to use that as the source. So while Charity Navigator is primarily a tool for donors, it can also be very useful for job hunters. You might recall that several weeks ago we talked about the website Glassdoor.com, a website with salary, hiring, and internal culture information about different employers. At the time, I mentioned that Glassdoor didn't have a lot of information about nonprofit organizations, particularly smaller nonprofits.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, and that's a function of a lot of nonprofits tend to be smaller, so they have fewer employees and ex-employees to fill out Glassdoor evaluations. Well, Charity Navigator does have a lot of this information that Glassdoor is missing, giving potential job seekers a great sneak peek into how those organizations operate. They do this by pulling information from each organization's 990 form, which is a public financial document that nonprofits are required to file each year by the IRS. On Charity Navigator, you can find out fairly detailed information on a nonprofit's financial and management history, which is really important when you're looking for a stable workplace. You can also see roughly how much money is spent on programming versus administrative or fundraising expenses, as Mac pointed out, and what programs receive the most support within the organization.
Ben, can't you get a lot of that information just from the nonprofit's website?
Good question, Cecilia. Sometimes you can. While it's generally a best practice to include this kind of information on an annual report on the company website, not all organizations do this. You know, everyone's trying to put their best foot forward when it comes to their website and their public presence. In general, I think the information on Charity Navigator tends to be a bit more impartial and data-driven, omitting a lot of that marketing jargon and cheerleading that you might find on those organizations' own website. You can also get a sense of what the salaries are within a given nonprofit. If you go to the full 990 form, which is available on Charity Navigator, you can see the organization's annual budget and the salary of top leadership. It's not going to tell you everyone's salary, so don't go looking for what the secretary is making. But from this information, you can infer a general salary range for other positions in the organization. For example, if the executive director is only making $45,000 a year, it's probably unlikely that a program director is going to be making the same amount. So this kind of benchmarking I found really valuable when I was looking for nonprofit jobs. I had a real firm minimum salary requirement, and many times the nonprofits I was interested in didn't list their salaries on their job postings. And a quick check on Charity Navigator told me if it was worthwhile applying for a particular position in that organization. So if you're looking for nonprofit jobs, I'd really encourage you to spend some time exploring the opportunities available on charitynavigator.com, and I'll have a link in the show notes.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. If you have a suggestion for Ben, write him directly, and we may share your idea on the show. Ben's address is ben, B-E-N, @maxlist.org. Now it's time to turn to you, our listeners. Cecilia Bianco, our community manager, is here to answer one of your questions. Cecilia, what do you hear from our community this week?
So our question this week is, how important is volunteer experience when applying for nonprofit jobs? And we get this question a lot because volunteering, a lot of people don't necessarily want to do it, but it can be really worthwhile. So from the people I've talked to, I think volunteer experience can be a bit of a leg up when you're applying for a nonprofit job. When there's a large pool of applicants who are all saying that an organization's cause is their passion, showing that you've donated your free time towards this cause is definitely going to help you stand out. But the importance of volunteering also depends on what type of work experience you already have. So you might have already worked in that nonprofit's area, so volunteering isn't as important because you're already showing that you're passionate enough to pursue a career in it. So what do you two think? Do you think volunteering is necessary?
I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's a good idea. And I think this is a form of networking that doesn't get employed enough. Mm-hmm. When you volunteer for an organization, you shouldn't do it to get a job, but it certainly gets your name out there and you get to meet other staff members and other people in the community. And in doing so, I think you improve your brand and your standing within that community and within that organization so that if or when a job opening does become available, you're a known commodity and someone that they know and trust with that position.
It's also a way of covering gaps in your resume. Mm-hmm. You can volunteer for a position at an organization that you want to have experience with to make those contacts, and obviously you do it in order to be of service. But while you look for work, having even a part-time position, volunteer position with an organization gives you a credential that you can use to plug those gaps. Because sometimes, particularly for people in mid-career, job searches can take 3, 6, or even 9 months.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're unemployed and looking for a nonprofit job, volunteering is a win-win because you're adding to your resume and showing how much you want your work to support a certain cause. And as Ben said, it's a great way to meet people who might be able to advocate for you when you go to apply at a certain organization. They might know someone who works for your dream nonprofit, and it can be really beneficial to volunteer because of this. We've I know I've heard plenty of stories of this happening in our nonprofit community. So it's definitely a win-win.
Good. Well, thank you, Cecilia. If you have a question for Cecilia, please email her. Her address is cecilia@maxlist.org. These segments by Ben and Cecilia are sponsored by the 2016 edition of Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. We're making the complete MaxList guide even better by adding new content and making the book available on multiple e-reader platforms. When we launch the revised version in February 2016, you'll be able to access Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond on your Kindle, Nook, iPad, and other digital devices. You'll also be able, for the first time, to order a paperback edition. Whatever the format, our goal is the same, to give you the tools and tips you need to get meaningful work. For more information, visit maxlist.org/ebook and sign up for our ebook newsletter. We'll send you publication updates, share exclusive book content, and provide you with special presale prices. Now let's turn to our guest expert, Allison Jones. Allison is passionate about making the world a better place. As a proud nonprofit geek, she has built her career in the sector, helping organizations leverage communications to fulfill their missions. Currently, Allison is the Marketing and Publications Director at N10, and that stands for the Nonprofit Technology Enterprise Network. Before that, she worked at Idealist.org, where she launched and managed Idealist Careers, a publication for purpose-driven professionals. Allison, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, and I know our listeners are too. We talked earlier about this in the show. We get this question a lot at MaxList. How can I get a nonprofit job? So when our listeners are thinking about that, what do you encourage them to consider when they look at a career in nonprofits?
Sure. I mean, my first gut reaction is to say, well, be more specific, right? Because I think a lot of folks, when they decide that they want a nonprofit job, they're usually coming from a place of just maybe they had a personal moment that made them want to, enter the social sector. So maybe they noticed something in their community, they had something happen in their personal lives, and they're just like, I want my work to be different. Or perhaps they met someone who seemed to have a really awesome career in a nonprofit, and it just sort of made them think differently about what their own career could be, which are all great, which are both, great starting points. But I think the nonprofit sector is so big that to say that you want a nonprofit job doesn't actually get you very far in terms of finding a job that you want. So the first thing I would say is to be a bit more specific.
Okay, that's a great point. And what steps have you seen people take to get specific? How do people narrow down on a particular goal?
Sure. There are a couple of things you can do there. The first, if you're completely new to the sector and you're not quite sure where to start, I actually encourage folks to just look through job descriptions, right? So get a sense of what's out there by seeing what's out there. And that might sound a little tedious, but there's an activity from NYU Wagner where they encourage you to do exactly that, to collect at least 50 job descriptions. And then analyze them for patterns. So you're drawn to this organization because of its cause. So you notice that you really like organizations that focus on poverty or the environment or what have you. You're drawn to this job because of the work itself. So, perhaps you notice you really enjoy writing, and then a lot of the jobs that you point out are jobs that require writing. Or even you're drawn to a job because of where it's located. You're passionate about certain areas. So looking for patterns in the things that you're drawn to, if you feel as if you're just completely coming at it, with fresh eyes for a new career, I think that's one way to start. Another way to start is to actually talk to people who seem like they have interesting careers in the nonprofit sector in the form of informational interviews. I give a lot of informational interviews, and I've gone on a lot of informational interviews. And they've been really, really helpful for me in my career.
Yeah, we're big fans of informational interviews here at MaxList. And I want to return to your point, too, about job postings. There are a lot of job boards out there. Do you aimed at nonprofit careers? Do you have any favorites that you want to give shout outs to?
I mean, I used to work at Idealist.org.
One of our favorites.
So I was there for 3.5 years. And even before I started working there, That's what I use to find opportunities.
Okay.
So
And
definitely Idealist being one of my top favorites.
great. And it pains me to say this, Allison, but I know there are people out there who haven't heard of MaxList or Idealist.org. Could you tell people about Idealist and why it's such a great place? Because we're big fans of it too.
Sure. Idealist.org is a global nonprofit that connects people to resources and opportunities in the community they need to take action on causes they care about. So what this means is we're really well known for our job board. And I think I haven't checked the stats lately because I don't work there anymore. But when I left, there were well over 12,000 nonprofit jobs. Actually, not just nonprofit jobs, but 12,000 jobs in nonprofits, social enterprises, and government agencies listed around the world. And there are also thousands of volunteer opportunities, thousands of internships. And if you're curious just about organizations, if you're not, if you just want to know what kind of organizations are out there doing work and causes that you care about, I think there were over 100,000 organizations using the site. So you could look at profiles of organizations just to get a sense of who's doing what. So it's a really great place to just go and start looking for ways to get involved.
Great. And to your earlier point, it's a great place to find those job postings and begin to identify those posts, look for those patterns. Any other sites you want to give a shout out to before we get back to informational interviews?
Other than Idealist, I think this may sound really strange, but I've heard good things about finding opportunities on Craigslist. Is another way, particularly for smaller cities. I think that tends to be a go-to for a lot of people posting opportunities.
Good. And then one other suggestion that comes to my mind is I know every state has a nonprofit association. Sometimes they have different names, and many of them do operate job boards. So,
and I'll also add to that, N10 also has a job board, particularly if you're interested in opportunities in tech. So I think one other way is to look for organizations that have a very specific focus in either in a cause or a profession. So if you're interested in social work, looking at social work associations. If you're interested in technology, looking at N10, that kind of thing. Organizations that act as associations or gatherings for folks in specific places, they tend to also list opportunities as well.
Okay, good. So people have taken the time, they've looked at job postings, they've identified positions, they've discovered those patterns that you described. Now they're ready to go do informational interviews. What are your top 3 informational interview tips for people who either want a career in the nonprofit sector or want to make a mid-career switch into the nonprofit world?
Yeah, sure. I think the first is to just prepare. Thinking of what you want to get out of the interview and craft some really great questions. So, for example, my favorite question is, what do you wish someone had told you before you got into this field? Where were you before you got to this organization or in this position? Finding out about people's career paths, I think, is a great way to let you know the different ways that people arrive in their work, and that can give you insights in terms of the kinds of skills that you need to brush up on. So if you're having these informational interviews and everyone's telling you, for example, if you want this role, grad school is really important, then you know that perhaps grad school is a step that you might want to take. But for me, I think these information interviews are also very surprising in the sense that in quite a few fields, people have various pathways they take, and I think that that's something that makes the nonprofit sector somewhat unique in the sense of there's no if you want to work in the nonprofit sector, this is the specific path that you must take, and of course that varies depending on certain roles, but I think you'll in informational interviews and the kinds of roles that you're looking for, you can really get a sense of the different pathways to finding a great career and getting insight as far as what people in your chosen profession have to do, what certain kinds of organizations are looking for in their candidates. So in preparing for information interviews to get a sense of pathways and honestly what it takes to excel in a certain role is a really great helpful way to make the use of them.
One question I hear from listeners when I encourage them to do informational interviews is they say to me, how do I know that was a successful meeting? What should I expect to get out of that conversation? What do you tell people when they ask you that question, Allison?
Oh, I think you get what you put into it. But I think for me, when I've gone on informational interviews, I tend to go in with a very specific need and specific questions. And I feel successful at the end if I'm able to take another step towards what I came to the informational interview for. So for example, you never go into an informational interview asking for a job. That's just sort of, you can ask about people's paths, what it takes to build a career in this field, what hiring managers might look for, but it's generally known that you don't ask for a job right then and there. But what I found in my experiences of going on informational interviews is I felt comfortable. I usually end up with clarity or a way to take action on something in my career. So that has looked like, oh, I thought I wanted to work at this kind of organization, but I actually don't anymore. I thought that I wanted to go to grad school, but I don't anymore. Or, I just learned about, that there are plenty of opportunities in this particular field that I didn't consider before, and I want to add that to my search list. So it gives me clarity, and I think a successful information interview gives you clarity and makes it easier for you to take another step towards where you want to be.
I think you're making an important point because often people tell me they want to stay open to all options, and one of the benefits I see from informational interviews is it provides that clarity, that direction, and gives you insights into what doors you should continue to knock on, and those that maybe you want to leave closed.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Now, I bet you get this question a lot about nonprofit jobs. I hear it too. What about salaries? What expectations should people have if they want a career in the nonprofit world, or they're thinking about moving into that sector?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is to know, how do I say this? I think at first it starts with you being very clear on what your non-negotiables are, right? So if there's a limit, if there's a minimum that you must have in order to take care of yourself, it's okay to turn down jobs if they don't reach that minimum, or they don't meet that minimum. And the reason why I bring that up first is because I've found that people tend to be a bit more, if they're committed to a cause and they want to make a difference, they tend to overestimate their ability to deal with a certain salary. And they end up getting very frustrated, especially when you're working on something that doesn't necessarily have an end in sight. Like if you're working on eradicating poverty, you may have milestones and goals over time, but obviously you're not going to see the end of poverty like any time over your course of working at an organization. So being clear about what you need in terms of salary and in terms of other benefits is very important. I also encourage folks to think, and I just mentioned this, to think in terms of total compensation. So if the salary issue comes up and it's not what you'd like it to be, it meets what you need but not what you want, perhaps. In my experience, I've found folks are very open to different kinds of benefits and to having that conversation. All that being said, I actually believe that you can have a great salary in the nonprofit sector. You just have to look and you have to ask. And that can be really tough. There are lots of, you can do research. There are some websites like salary.com. You can look at an organization's 990s, and 990s, I think, only tell you folks who are making over $100,000 at the organization, if I'm not mistaken. But that can still give you a sense of, if you're looking if you are going for an executive position, or if you want to get a sense of the top salaries, that does give you a good picture of what that looks like. So there are ways to get a sense of what salary options are in terms of your research, but definitely going in with a sense of what you need is very important.
Yeah. And what are some of those other benefits besides salary that you can get from the nonprofit world, or that you should ask for? Because I think people are reluctant to ask for things, and when they're in a negotiation for a position, that's when they have that opportunity. And I think they're either reluctant to step up and ask, or they don't know what to request. So what sorts of things can people ask for in addition to money?
Sure. Vacation days, if that's vacation and sick days, I've definitely seen that. Any other help with transportation? So if folks, depending on where you live, covering gas or your public transportation costs is another thing. Professional development support and resources. So what funding is on the table for you to go to conferences and get the PD that you need so you can excel in your work. So there are a bunch of different things, and you can definitely do some research on that. But just again, the point is to be very clear about what's most important to you.
Okay. And people come to nonprofit work often because they have a calling or they want to make a difference. They feel a sense of purpose. But the job search basics still matter, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what are the ABCs that you can't ignore, whether you're looking for nonprofit work or any kind of job?
Sure. I think, first of all, following directions is really important. And it's funny, when I worked at Idealist, I was able to talk to quite a few hiring managers, and I hired some folks for my team as well. And it's surprising how many folks don't follow directions, whether it be, answer these 3 questions in your cover letter, and people just aren't doing it, stuff like that. So not following directions is not just a matter of, the hiring manager is trying to test you, but also it's more of a matter of, this actually helps us read applications and select candidates easier and faster if you follow directions. So just making sure you do what's being asked of you, tailoring the cover letter and the resume to the job itself, and that in and of itself can be a bit of a conversation. But what that really means is, you're looking at the job description. What are they looking for the candidate to do? What kind of candidate are they looking for? Not just in terms of qualifications, but also in terms of attributes and characteristics. Is it, are they saying they need someone who can thrive in a fast-paced environment? Are they saying that they need someone who's collaborative? Like being able to indicate not only your successes as they pertain to the needs of the job, but also your ability to fit in terms of the attributes and characteristics that a person will need to do in that work. Focusing on your accomplishments. So this is something that I've seen on a lot of resumes, where it's just like, I worked at X place and I did X things, versus I worked at X place and did X things, which resulted in, increasing revenue, decreasing turnover, whatever have you, but making sure it attaches to some key accomplishments. And being clear about why you want to work there. And this is true in your cover letter, for organizations that are mission driven, who their entire purpose is to have an impact. I think being clear about why you want to work in that cause and why with that organization, and not just, because it seems like a cool place to be, but really something specific is important. And finally, proofreading, error-free, easy to read, decent margins. Those are also really important things.
Okay. We're coming to the end of our interview soon, but there is one question I want to raise that we get a lot. It's from people who have been in the private sector for 5, 10, 15 years, and they want to make the transition into the nonprofit world. And they tell us they struggle. They're not sure how to describe what they've done and make it appealing to nonprofit managers and hiring managers. How have you seen people address that, Allison?
In a few ways. And first, I actually want to there's someone in particular who I just thought of, Heather Krasna. She's a dean at Columbia University, I think School of Public Health. She is brilliant at this sort of thing, really working with sector switchers. So I definitely recommend her as a resource.
Okay. And we'll let's get a URL from you, and we'll put her in the show notes.
But as far as just making the sector switch, first I think it's networking is really important. I think having people who can give you an inside look as to what's required to work in a nonprofit, because I think in some ways there is some suspicion of private sector folks. Are you coming here because you want a break? Are you coming here because you think it'll be easier? So there's some suspicion, I think, from nonprofit folks, not all the time, and not in every case, but just the wondering of you need to be able to answer that question of why are you making the switch, and being very honest about that. I think making, there are some language tweaks in your resume and cover letter. So instead of saying, instead of saying things like client or customer, you might want to say, community or constituent or something like that, where it makes the most sense to do so. I still think that and also the transferable skills are important as well. So things like, if the job you're going for requires you to be a great public speaker, that's something that you can call out in your resume and cover letter as things you've done in different contexts. So it's a skill that you don't necessarily need to have developed in the nonprofit sector. You could have developed anywhere, but you want to make sure you pull that out, or call that out rather, in your materials as something you have done in different contexts, and they've still resulted in great things. And finally, getting nonprofit experience where you can. I mean, obviously finding a full-time job is awesome and ideal, but if you've been on a board, if you volunteered, if you've offered your consulting services, pro bono, those are all experiences that are valuable because they indicate that you've done some work before trying to apply for a job, that you have some experience with the nonprofit sector, and that you're not just coming at it blind.
Great. Well, I think that's the perfect place to stop. Thank you, Allison, so much for joining us.
And, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you can find Allison on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is at AJLovesYa, and she also has a LinkedIn profile. We'll include links to both her Twitter account and her LinkedIn page in the show notes. Thank you, Allison Jones.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back with the Max List team. Cecilia, Ben, what are some of the key takeaways from our conversation with Allison?
What I took away was that no matter where you're at, informational interviews in the nonprofit world are the best way to get connected. And I think she made a lot of good points about how to go about that and why it's so important. Because we know from talking to the Max List community, a lot of people are getting jobs through meeting people in the community, and the easiest way to do that is through informational interviews.
Good. Ben, how about you?
I liked her point about how important it is to follow instructions in a job posting. It reminded me of a job I used to work at where as part of the hiring process, they would put in slightly anachronistic rules into that job posting. And one of the ways they weeded out if the applicant was detail-oriented was, did they follow the rule? Things like put this as the subject line in the email when you email in your resume and application. And they wouldn't even open up an email unless it had the right subject line in it. So I think it's important to really read through the application, make sure you're following all the instructions they give, because there is a reason behind those instructions. And oftentimes it's just to winnow out the numbers of applicants.
Yeah, I thought she had good practical suggestions both on informational interviews and the application process that would apply not only to the nonprofit world, but the private sector as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so good stuff. Well, thank you both, and thank you, our listeners. We'll be back next week with more tools and tips you can use to find your dream job. In the meantime, you can visit us at maxlist.org, where you can sign up for our free newsletter with more than 100 new jobs every week. And if you like what you hear on the show, please help us by leaving a review and a rating at iTunes. This helps others discover the show and helps us help more job seekers. Thank you for listening.